The idea is also, I'm sure that you've seen the interviews that we had before. If you haven't, is on one of the Minded Chats of a couple of years ago, probably 3 by now, because if we count all the time lost in COVID. You tell us when you're ready, and so we are.
It is recording.
Okay, it's recording right now.
Yeah.
We might want to go to the right slides. So we're not going to use the slides.
Yeah, exactly.
We're going to use as when you run through it. Just wait until the elevator stops. We go to the roof.
Well, I see you've kept this alive.
It's still alive. I mean, it's like untouched.
Yeah.
You know, we're probably using. We use it 4 or 5 times. I've had some demo days here and there. A few courageous groups where wanted to get out. We actually had some of those were pretty sizable, but we haven't used it that much. How was life at StartX?
Well, I know what happened with Ricardo was Italy just called back all the felts.
I know. Remember, I had to rush.
Emergency, yeah. So compared to that, I think we're doing great. Stanford just reopened for in-person this school year. So other than probably like 3 or 4 weeks in January where we shut down briefly, all of our student activities have been 100% in person.
Okay.
And then our alumni, professors, sort of the broader community engagement, we're slowly picking that back up as well. But over the time, I think between when we talked now and we talked last, I believe we added 9 new billion-dollar companies.
Oh wow! Yeah, we went to keep that for the record. So I was just wondering how was the life of going back to the office, because you had some renovation of the office. I remember.
Yes, we did. Yeah.
Okay, so try to be as quiet as possible. We can turn off any sound of cell phones and stuff because we're recording as we go. Okay, this is already going?
Yes.
All right, good afternoon. We're here for another Minded Chat. We're more than happy to have with us a speaker who I've had in the past, but it's great to catch up and see how things have evolved in this crazy time between us. We have Joseph Huang as the CEO of StartX. We were talking about how is the time of COVID has impacted the activities of StartX. Maybe give us a little bit of what happened in those 2 last years.
So StartX itself invested a lot in our digital experiences. We have a large community of about 2,000 founders, and being able to get all of them to interact digitally in different ways has been great, because as we return back to in-person, a lot of those we've been doing some data science, graph analysis, things that we can do online that we can't do in person. And sort of augmenting those things together has been really cool. So we've built like a knowledge graph of who the different experts are in the community on what, so that can be crowdsourced, that the community can sort of engage in. And we had to do that for COVID because you can't have these big mixer events. But in exchange, now that we have these big mixer events, we can still add that on top. So I think that's been really cool. And as we were talking just before the camera turned on, Stanford went back to in-person for this school year. And StartX's broader community activities are also slowly ramping up. We hope to have our first one, fingers crossed, in the end of April.
So now you got me intrigued. How do you build this knowledge graph of your hubs and maybe connecting points and some of the, I think, key mentors or partners you might have had? That's
right. So I think one of the most important insights of StartX over the first 10 years was that when you're building a company, you have to solve problems that have never been solved before. It's not necessarily a matter of going to school and learning from a textbook and doing things that everyone already knows the answer to, right? Stanford, most of what we teach at Stanford, we're asking students to answer questions we already know the answer. We need to see if they get it right. But entrepreneurship is about solving problems that have never been solved. And so the key to that is looking for people with similar experiences. And the more narrow you can get, the better. And so when it comes to, if I'm trying to figure out how to do my enterprise SaaS pricing, or I'm trying to figure out what steps to take to get to product market fit, you need to find people who have been in your shoes before, maybe 2-3 years ago, and have solved that problem. Recent enough that they can relate to your experience, but far enough that they have the right answers. And so historically, we would do this through a lot of these events, where we would say, hey, you've got this topic, talk to each other, figure it out, meet each other, learn. And over the whole 10 years, we've always asked people in their exit interviews, who ended up helping you with this? And we would write it down mostly for our own learning purposes. But what we realized during COVID is we have 10 years of data here, and why don't we allow it to be crowdsourced? So we use that as the initial graph. And now when founders come in and they say, hey, I have this interesting question, it will say, well, here's the answer from the graph, but also it'll shoot out emails to different members of the community saying, hey, do you want to nominate someone? And so we've tried to recreate that serendipitous exchange, but in a digital format. And I don't think ever digital will fully replace this in-person interaction, but I also think in-person's never going to be able to do what the digital can do. So we're coming out of this embracing the chance to do both.
Yeah, as everybody else. How big is that graph? I'm intrigued to understand what are the boundaries where your network can.
Yeah, so there's probably maybe 170 different categories that people can have tags on. And each of those tags, it's every interaction they've had in the past that we have in our records, plus the crowdsourced one. And so there's probably tens of thousands of different combinations labeled on stage of company, topic, is it about fundraising, is it about hiring, is it about FDA regulatory, is it about legal, and then each of those, it's also crowdsourced. The community can come in and say, oh, I don't think this phrase is the right phrase for my type, let's change it. And so now it's like this evolving system, which I think is super cool.
And is that based on an existing CRM on a Salesforce platform, or is that something you built from scratch?
We have a software platform we use to run our admissions process.
Yeah.
And already captures a lot of these tags for the applicants. And so we just repurposed it for the community, the active community. And it ties into like the mailing list that we already have and the profile system that we already have. So back in the day, it was all captured in the CRM, but we just exported all of it and converted it into the system.
And now is that a system that you develop on top, or is
So StartX has had since like 2013 or something. It's had to build its own software for the admissions process because people have to be able to log in and check their applications. And back then there was you couldn't just buy Accelerator. An app to run your accelerator.
Which we do, by the way.
Yeah. And so nowadays those things are available, but back then we just had to create it. And so we've always had that system, and we can just add things to it, which is
interesting. All right, let's step back a second. Again, also for the viewers, we have interviewed you in the past, a very intriguing career that took you to running a not-for-profit that is StartX, but maybe just a short version of your background, what took you to StartX and what still gets you excited?
Yeah, so I graduated from Stanford. We worked in the self-driving car lab, and I met my co-founder in that lab, Dave Millman. And the thing that attracted us to work together to start a company was that we both were really drawn towards solving like real-world problems. Like, top universities around the world are often trying to create new knowledge, right? Like you can do a PhD and change the boundaries of what humanity even knows. But the thing that motivated us the most was, can we solve a problem that people face today? And so entrepreneurship obviously is a big draw in that sort of world. And we had, in part of our research, we had found this algorithm. We produced a solution to a problem that our mentors on the research side were saying, oh yeah, like Qualcomm has a team of 12 people working on this, they can't figure it out. Broadcom has a team of 8 people working on this, they can't figure it out. Intel has a team of 15 people working on this, they can't figure it out. And so if you have something, at least publish a paper, but maybe it's worth something. And so like the naive, like the enterprising, I'll say, grad students that we were, we published our paper. But then when we graduated, you think about like this was what, 2011. If you graduated in 2011 from Stanford with computer science, the thing, your top choice was like, go work at Google, work on ads. Or go work at Facebook, work on ads. Or what about this thing we built that, like, it seems like it's valuable, it solves this problem. And for those of you who, check the comments in the video below, and there's probably going to be links to the first interview. But the short version is, we were able to solve the problem that GPS solves, but without any of the satellites. Right, so GPS requires talking to different satellites that are all over the world, and we had taken some of these breakthroughs that had made self-driving cars possible, that's the lab we came from, to apply machine learning on the ambient radio waves that are already in the air, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, just these all over the place. You could create these little fingerprints. And you could use that to solve GPS without ever needing the satellites at all. And it even worked, especially it worked indoors, like large airports, large malls, museums, where you can't, the building itself, like in here, you're not going to be able to see any satellites. But it turns out, 5 years later, to also be the method of choice, even in downtown San Francisco or large cities where the buildings are tall enough that you can't see the satellites even when you're outside. So we had solved this problem, and we graduated from Stanford, and we thought, okay, well, we could just ignore it, and then will humanity ever have an answer to this problem? Or should we just try to do it? And long story short, we applied to StartX. When we joined StartX, we were company number 20.
So StartX has started a few years earlier.
Yes, that's right. There were 19 companies before us. Now there's 800, so it's a totally different world. And then over the next 3 years, we learned everything about how to run a company. They took us from these 2 kids with an idea and a technology all the way to a venture-backed company. We were caught in a bidding war. We sold our company to Apple. And over the next 3 years, we spun this out. It's now, if you have an iPhone, which maybe half of you do, it's now how all your location is calculated, except when you're in the desert and only the satellites are the only thing that's there.
So there was your entrepreneurial experience, and then a number of other activities in between in the corporate world took you to StartX. What gets you excited today still at StartX after a number of years?
So what's always been fun. So I first joined StartX because what you'll find, and especially for people from outside the country, you think, oh, Silicon Valley, this is where all the startups are. Everyone's doing startups. It's tech and all this cool stuff. But what you realize is there's so much infrastructure here for building startups that if you're just out here in Silicon Valley building companies, it can very quickly get very competitive, very materialistic, very superficial. It's just dog eat dog competition, right? Survival of the fittest is how we launch these companies into the world. And maybe that's the way it has to be. But the thing that every day still excites me about StartX is at StartX, maybe it's the Stanford culture, maybe it's the way StartX runs, maybe it's because of the model that's a nonprofit. There are many factors. But at StartX, we've got about 2,000 entrepreneurs, and we add more every year, that commit to working together, to collaborating as a pool of entrepreneurs to make all the companies succeed, rather than competing amongst each other to see which ones win. And the longer I'm here in Silicon Valley, the more I look to see what else is out there, and you just don't find communities like that, and it's just so much fun.
That got me thinking that one of the heavy lifting in running accelerators is maintaining the community, in particular of the mentors. Mm-hmm. That is somewhat gray area engaged. Why do you think that those mentors are still engaged with StartX year over year?
There's 2 things that are really interesting. So number 1, StartX it's completely free, right? So we're a nonprofit, we 0% equity, we don't charge any fees, there's no tuition, there's nothing, you come in as free. And that allows us to attract a different group of entrepreneurs. So the typical startups that would go to an accelerator are the ones that, they're not sure what they need to do, and they think maybe if I give up some equity, I'll get some training, and then off I go, and for many that's helpful. But consider that the majority of entrepreneurs are like Stanford professors, right? So you'll have a professor who has some new cure for liver failure, and they think, oh, well, either I'm going to publish a paper, or we need to actually cure liver failure. So I need to build a company, we have to manufacture the drug, we have to get FDA approval, and then patients can actually use it. Because otherwise, why am I researching this stuff? And so you think, well, someone like that, or like Tor Jacob, who applied to StartX a few cycles ago, He actually graduated from Stanford 15 years ago. And he didn't even start a company. He went to McKinsey, like many enterprising Stanford graduates do. And over the next 15 years, he worked at McKinsey for all 15 years. And he worked his way up the ranks. And when he was done, he was the head of McKinsey's global oil and gas division. He was consulting with Fortune 1, Fortune 5.
Especially now, with the gas prices as they are. Yes.
There you go. And these are the sorts of people who find opportunities, in his case in data science, to solve global warming. And if you can't do it as a consultant, you have to do it as an entrepreneur. And so our mandate is to support this ecosystem of Stanford alumni, Stanford professors. And when you do that, there's nowhere else you can go to mentor people like this, because most of the accelerators, you're asking people to give something up. And the only people who give something up are the people who don't think they're that far, that they're not in that tier where they don't need help. And mentors actually find a lot of value in engaging with. So there's two effects, as I was saying. Number one, we have fewer entrepreneurs for sure. It's Stanford only, and then also that it's like the professors and there's alumni, these experienced folks. But number two, they end up tackling different types of problems, right? Like we always talk about how if you pick a random startup out here in Silicon Valley, you probably get like a social network or sharing photos of cats, and then someone else building an app to order pizza on your phone, the like stereotypical Silicon Valley startups. But if you ask a Stanford professor what motivates you, what problems are motivating you to be solved, they're not going to say, oh, I really want another app to order pizza on my phone. They are trying to solve interesting problems, interesting to them, whether it's like global warming, whether it's like food, hunger, global disease, new forms of energy, AI, and so I think the other thing that really attracts these mentors is that there are really impactful problems being solved. On the flip side, there are things that StartX does. So StartX, for example, when you apply to StartX, we only accept between 8 to 10% of the applicants. It's not a quota that just is roughly how many applicants it takes to meet our quality bar.
It's not just quality bar, but do you also maintain the number restricted?
No, there's no restriction on the number, but there is a culture, one of the stages in the application process. So it takes between 20 and 50 judges to judge a single team getting through. And there's 4 rounds of different interviews or applications, reference checks and things. But one of those rounds is strictly a culture interview to find out if this is an entrepreneur that's willing to support all the other entrepreneurs around them as well.
Okay. So it's embedded, the mentoring effect is embedded in the selection process. I didn't get
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is, so I have mentors that have been, I talked to mentors who have been mentoring for 12 years at StartX. And I asked them, hey, why do you keep doing this? Like, you could mentor anywhere, there's all these different places. And they say, so number one, obviously, the startups you have are incredible. We can talk about the stats later. Like, they all have really, really great success. And that's exciting to see, because I mentor a team, and it becomes worth it, right? You can lose a lot of energy if you're mentoring a bunch of teams and the companies don't really work out. But number two is, they're all really great people. Like, it's not just smart, talented, enterprising entrepreneurs, but they're just lovely people to be around. And that's a filter we've had since 2011. It wasn't, I think it was added in the second year of StartX.
When you joined?
It's funny, there's a funny story. They asked us, the community, imagine this, right? So StartX is 3 years old, and they said, okay, we have our admissions process. It's about 15 to 30 judges, but we want to add another round for the community, what you want. And so I and some of the other founders early on in 2012, we said, okay, well, we want entrepreneurs that we're all going to help each other. And so we invented that culture interview stage. And I have none of the questions now are ones that I've written, but the original ones were the ones that I wrote, and others have built on it, and now, dozens of founders have contributed. But it makes for a really interesting community. And I actually think it's a big reason why our companies have success, because, accelerators are everywhere. And we always say there's 1,000 places you can go to learn about the first 9 months of starting a company. How do you incorporate? How do you do your first sale? How do you make your first pitch deck? How do you make your first hire? But it takes 7 to 10 years to IPO. And where do you go after those? If you're lucky. And where do you go for those next 9 years and 3 months? And unless there's going to be a community around you to also teach you not how to make your first hire, but when do you hire an in-house recruiter, how do you make that decision? Not how you make your first sale, but how do I structure the incentives in my sales team, right? Not how do I make my first pitch deck, but I need to manage my board, I'm raising Series B, very different from seed funding. And having that support all the way through, I think is a big reason why the later stage you get, the more success we see in our companies. And also, I think it's a big reason why female founders, Black and Latinx founders are all, any minority group that normally might not fit the patterns are able to find that support and are able to succeed. I don't know if I include this slide today. I might have missed it. There's a lot of cool stats. But female-led StartX companies are raising 5 times the industry average proportion of venture funding compared to industry average. And a big part of that is not feeling like you're alone.
So I want to talk about some statistics, and I think those are always interesting to update, and they always blow me away. Before going there, since you're started talking about the ecosystem around you, Stanford first and foremost, why don't we get a kind of an update also for people that maybe might be a little bit less familiar with the new institutes that are there. What are the hubs within Stanford that can also support and create and generate a lot of intellectual property that potentially then turns into entrepreneurship? So I think we have a slide. If we go down, I think it's slide 22. If you're looking at it, I think we have some visual that we see the number of institutions, a bunch of stuff that we're going to go back in a second to, but. I'm also interested about the relatively new institutes that are, I think, hubs per se on...
So the newest one, if you go down one more slide.
One more.
The newest one is the Transforming Learning Accelerator. These guys launched during COVID, in fact. And it's a new initiative for, it's interesting because Stanford is an educational institution. And this is an accelerator specifically to change the way learning works, which... Funnily enough, Stanford's like 200 years old, and they finally decided we're going to innovate our own work too.
And that's relatively new. When did it get started?
I remember we met to make the very first website for it in, it was during COVID, it was on Zoom, and it was in the fall. So it was not 2019, it must have been 2020 fall.
So it was a couple of years ago.
October, November, yeah.
Interesting.
A year and a half. So that's the newest one. Some of these have been around a very long time.
So engineering obviously has a lot of history, School of Business.
Yes, and the newest one that's not on this yet,
yeah, that's what I was
looking at, is Humanities and Sciences. So they're launching an arts incubator, which was in the works with COVID. I think the schedule has changed a little, but that's a new one coming out. And then of course the School of Sustainability will be our 8th school.
That's what I had 2 questions about that. The School of Sustainability, that is a big deal because it's been in the works for some time. We'll connect a bunch of other departments of other areas of Stanford, but with the idea of having climate as one of the common ground and climate effect. Give us whatever you know about that in terms of time. I think they're launching in September of this year, but the idea of how would you think that it will also become a center of support and engagement with potential entrepreneurs? So
StartX's mandate, we're not part of the discussions of the timing on the schools. When it gets to the point that they want to see, so the mandate of Stanford in general is this, right? We need to support students that are in school. We need to support the professors that are doing research and often the postdocs. The challenge Stanford had prior to StartX, back 2008, was that as the day you leave school, you can't access any of the resources anymore the same way that you. Otherwise there would still be 200,000 students on campus. It would be ridiculous. But there needed to be a vehicle to make sure that as an alumni or as a professor that's spinning out a company, that if you really want, like I said at the beginning, if you published something that could cure liver failure and you actually want real patients to get it and you need to put it in industry, you need some vehicle to help support that cause. And so our job is to collaborate with each school that sort of pops up and provide that support once it leaves the university. And so because for example, this new school isn't going to have students that graduate for a while, it'll be a while till they sort of come to us. We do have some smaller student programs like the StartX Fellows program and the scholarship and things for active students, but that's not the core of what we do.
Do you maintain this relationship in a formal way, right? There is a process with which you go constantly on different institutes and kind of either promote or filter, track, communicate, or is that so embedded now in the culture at Stanford that there is that thing that's called StartX, that if you want to be an entrepreneur, if you already are actually an entrepreneur successful, you might as well take advantage?
Yeah, it's not either or, it's both, right? So there's definitely a big part of it is understanding like why StartX exists, why Stanford, why the president of Stanford encouraged this to happen early when they were evaluating what's missing. But then also, yeah, formally we interact with all of these guys in different ways. They each have different needs, and we want to make sure that we support. You can imagine, like the business school, these are students coming in, having worked in industry, and they're doing a particular thing, or versus biodesign, which works with postdocs as well as researchers, less so much, and they have a class as well. But engineering, a lot of them are just like new grads. They're getting their degree. Maybe it's like a master's in CS, trying to go do something. So they end up with different needs, mostly because the schools are structurally different to serve different purposes. Right. And as you can see, like Transforming Learning Accelerator, the newest one on this list was created sort of to challenge even how Stanford what learning is.
Is that called accelerator because they do also have an internal accelerator, or just the name of the institute?
We're in the second year now of the design challenge. It actually funds real projects that have the potential to turn into real businesses, some nonprofit, some for-profit, but all to improve education.
All right, so that's on top of the institution that is teaching.
Yeah, so on each of these, the logo is for the school, and then the text is for usually the center that's put together initiative.
Yeah, and then Tom Cutt is the Center of Sustainability that we're talking about. I don't see the one about Human Center AI.
So there are research labs all across campus as well, but many of them, their mandate is not to make entrepreneurship succeed.
Got it. So,
and so if I had to put every course in every lab,
we're going to have a space enough. Awesome. All right, let's go back into again numbers, throughput of StartX, and again, I think there's some statistics always blow me away. We can go in 2 or 3 slides back in the amount of companies compared to other accelerators that are able to to get funded 100 million more. Just to get also a comparative analysis with I believe that here is everybody else, right? Any company from best accelerators, definition of best accelerator to be defined, but we assume really tier ones, most of them from Silicon Valley. Look at the difference that is out there.
Yeah, and so this is something that's interesting, right? When you look at, I don't know if that's like, if you look at like Series A, if you come and seed, what percentage of our companies get to Series A? I think the Series A is about 1.6, 1.7x. And then when you get to 100 million, it's 3x. When you get to 1 billion, it's 5x. And that really tells a story about what's missing in the journey of an entrepreneur. Those first 9 months, like we said, about how to start a company, is being provided everywhere. But what's the point of starting a company if 4 years from now it's not going to work or it's going to plateau? And so the journey of StartX has always been, we want to support our companies all the way through. And I don't know if I have a slide on here, but when we last talked, we probably had 4 billion-dollar companies.
Yeah, go next. I think the next one is even more staggering, is 5 times more billion-dollar companies than any major accelerator. If you go to the next one, I think there's also the fact, there we go.
Yeah, so we're at our current pace, we're creating billion-dollar unicorns out of every 28 companies that we admit after 7 to 8 years.
Just crazy. I mean, how is that? Is that accelerated from even 3 years ago?
Well, so like this, we always do this comparison because we're trying to figure out what we're doing right and what we're not. And like when Y Combinator was the same, so if you compare it, 2013 we opened all Stanford, and today we're in year 9. When Y Combinator was in year 9, they had 3 billion-dollar companies, and StartX right now has 15. Now, that's not to say that it's better or worse, because I think like professors aren't going to go to an accelerator that asks for equity, so we have a different pool. And similarly, everyone will say, "Oh, we'll keep you connected for forever," but we're deliberately making sure that if you need support, you get support all the way through.
And that's a big difference by design. Now, I don't know if that was the case in 2011 where you were there, or the concentration was still more on the early stage. Now it's clear that there is plenty of value all the way through. What is, if you were to give maybe a statistic, I don't see here, but how many companies that you have in on average in your batch that is, let's call it by series of investment, Series B plus, B onwards?
Okay, so I know that Series A is greater than 50%.
Okay.
Series B, I don't know that number off the top of my head, but you could project, I guess. You have to do some calculations in between, or I could ask the team to calculate that. I think for us, so it's funny, right? Because most of these Silicon Valley ecosystems, and even if you're reading about Silicon Valley from outside the country, you think, oh, the funding or the number of companies, the success of companies is what you care about. But we're an educational institution, right? We're a nonprofit. And so everything we measure internally is, are people learning? Do they feel like they have the knowledge they need to succeed? Do they feel like they have the mentorship they need to succeed, whatever stage it is? And so we spend so much time tracking what their learning goals are. Are they achieving them? Did they get connected to someone? How valuable was that help? The numbers we have here are like when we take a moment, we say, oh, maybe we should calculate some things. And every time we do it, we're always really excited.
Last topic I want to address before then we open to questions is then again, it is the context that you work here is also in integration from the world startups and world corporations, harder to innovate with all the issues that are out there. There's a whole theory of open innovation, things that work and things that work less. Is that integration with the commercial companies? Is that something that you have seen evolve in your time at StartX?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really exciting about the corporate program today is that corporations come to us for the same reason they go to everywhere else that there's corporate innovation. But the mandate for us is we want quality. We want actually, like if at the end of the year I have 2 new pilots that could be new lines of revenue, that's better than meeting 100 companies and having 0. And I think a lot of what we hear, the more we learn about the corporate world, is that even if you set up an innovation hub here in Silicon Valley, and I'm sure you know all these folks, sometimes at the end of the year when they say, what do? They say, oh, I saw hundreds of companies, but 6 months later, none of them were in business anymore, right? Or the ones that were in business, they did something, but then our research team didn't like it. And what's interesting about this is the StartX companies, well, first of all, half the time it's like a professor or like, some of these experienced folks, but even the students that are launching brand new breakthrough businesses, if you don't partner with them, they're going to change your industry anyway. Like the rate at which they're getting to $100 million, $1 billion, we got our first 3 $10 billion companies this year. Like they are shaping the industries that you, the corporate, are part of. And whether you partner with them or not, this is probably someone you should get to know. And I think, and so we've changed our model from an exposure-based model to a more intimate relationship-based model, where maybe we'll only put you in touch with 8 companies all year, but 4 of them will materially move the needle on you're a Fortune 500 company, it still moves the needle on your entire strategy because it's a brand new, I remember the most recent strategic summit we did with one of our corporate partners. They're like a global manufacturing firm. We had an executive from Asia, an executive from Europe, an executive from the headquarters in Japan. They were all sort of, they were meeting with some of our entrepreneurs just to hear their insights on the future of the markets. And a day later, the executives emailed us and like, oh my God, I've already bought their product, we're testing it out in our lab. And it was like real results, which I think is so hard to talk about in corporate innovation, especially because how do you measure something that's supposed to only take effect 7 years from now? And so I think that's been really, really exciting.
Yeah. And acceleration, the time to market has been compressed by any means lately. Also the ability to have access to unlimited capital, that's definitely also accelerating that fear that the startup that initially 15 years ago you thought would be a long time coming, the next year is the one that is actually eating your business. So.
Yeah, and the scariest thing, there's innovation, but then there's the actual R&D departments. And the scariest thing with working with a startup, if you're a big company, is like, what if 2 years from now that startup's not here anymore and we've already invested all this time and energy into it? And so a lot of the confidence, so a lot of the models around corporate innovation are, okay, let's just scout for ideas and see if we can do them internally or whatever we need to do. But the level of confidence you can have when you work with StartX, and the things that our partners really appreciate is, if we put you in touch with someone, 90% of the time, they're still going to be there for as long as that relationship exists. And that level of confidence allows them to do things and interact in ways that would not have even been valuable options before.
Very good. I think that would conclude our conversation. So thanks again, Joseph. It's pleasure always.
Like and subscribe down below and make sure that we have more followers.
StartX. All right, thank you.